can we
Yeah.
return to the principle of the buds and maybe very, very quickly recap it and maybe talk
Yeah,
about its
yeah,
use in
yeah,
research?
yeah, yeah.
Cool.
So now to the point. Well, before discussing the principles, the experimental principles, just want to come one step back, because I'm not sure the possible viewers of this video have a whole range of videos seen before. So just
Yeah,
a bit
sure.
of so.
Nikolai, I'm going to pause 1 second. Okay.
Just before coming to principle number 3, 4, and 5, just a little bit of updates about why these principles and why they're so important and why. So these are principles of experimental study. These are principles which were designed to support the researchers to make sure that they are doing real cultural, historical, or Vygotskian type of experiment. And why they are important? First of all, the first reason is that if we are using Vygotsky as a theoretical framework, cultural historical theory as a framework, we have to understand the matter, the subject of this theory. The subject of the theory, subject matter of the theory, is the process of development of higher psychological functions. The process. So the theory which studies the process of development, not the results, not the phenomena, but the process which stands behind the phenomenon. So it's not an object understudy. It's not a phenomena understudy. It's a process understudy. So the dynamics, the process, not just the things we can just grab and make a video or audio picture about that. So it's not about pictures, it's about movies, so to speak. So the process. But how is it possible to make the process, to collect the data which shows you the process, not just the manifestation? So, because traditionally in education research, in psychological research, what we do, we are collecting data. What does it mean, collecting data? We are making observations. We are making videos of observations, and we are collecting the data which is the result of our observations. But what we can observe, what we can see, is not the process. It's only the empirical facts which are manifestations of this process. And the process itself remains hidden. We cannot see the processes. That's the most important and the most difficult challenge for psychology, to change the lenses from the results, from the empirical facts, from the patterns to the processes which are hidden. And we can only see these processes through the manifestation. Like a fish under the water, you can see only the line on the water. Sometimes you see the ding, 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 ding. So you don't know. So it's a kind of, we can only see the top of the iceberg, but we don't know what is behind the whole water. And because for Vygotsky, the matter of the theory should be the process. So what follows from this is very simple. We have to change our method of data collection. We have to change our ways of how we collect the data and how we analyze the data. Because if we collect all the tips of the icebergs, we will never have an idea about the iceberg. We have to find a way how to get into the water and to see the whole complexity which is hidden. So that's why Vygotsky suggested the new type of experiment. And this new type of experiment has its name, which is called experimental genetic method, or genetic experimental method. What does it mean, genetic experimental? Genetic here doesn't mean biological genetics. It means process of development. It comes from genesis. Genesis is a development. experimental genetic methods, which means that we have in the laboratory, or in everyday situations of the child, we have to find a way how to reconstruct, how to open, how to make able to see the process of development which leads the child from one stage to another, transition of the child from one. So from the questions how, we have to change the question to why. Instead of asking how the child goes, how the child does this. It's very easy. If you have a question like this, how the child is doing that, the answer is that the child is doing this by this way, this way, this way, this way. So, but Vygotsky's question is not how the child is doing this and that. The Vygotsky's question is why the child doing this at this stage and then doing that. And then what process is behind the child is doing this at this stage and then doing that and then doing that. So moving the questions from how, descriptive, to why, analytical, is important. So, and
can this type of method be used in observation, or do you have to actually create the process to do this method?
Yeah, there are two ways. First, what Vygotsky did, mostly he created certain conditions for the child, and then made an observation in a specially created laboratory conditions. For example, studying child's memory or attention or concept formation. Sakharov experiments are examples. At the same time, for educational research, we often have no opportunity to have even a psychological laboratory. We have to observe the children in their everyday life, school setting, early childhood settings, family settings. But it doesn't mean that development doesn't happen there. Of course it happens. Of course it happens. And we have to make an observation of the children, but in this data collected, we have to find the moments, the interesting parts of these observations which help us to understand the changes, the qualitative changes the child is going through. So we are not analyzing the whole bulk of data. Having these principles in mind, we select some interesting moments. It's like the child is not in a laboratory, child in his everyday conditions, but it's a kind of laboratory of life, because sometimes life sends us challenging tasks. So we are not inviting the child to the lab and giving him challenging tasks. We are making him observation in school settings. And when the child meets the challenging tasks, that's the point.
Okay.
Okay. So, and just to make it clear, I can give you one of the examples Vygotsky used. He said that why the method of empirical observation is not always good. One of the problems with this method of making the research by observing the phenomena is that sometimes the phenomena, psychological phenomena, which looks similar for us, they are not similar by their nature, because they are results of different lines of development. But being results, they look absolutely similar, and that's why we might mistakenly unify them into the pattern and compare them. But the mistake is that we are comparing things having different natures. We are comparing boots and fruits. Okay, so which is not. So, and just to entertain our possible viewers, can I make an experiment with you, Anthony?
Okay.
Okay. So the task is very easy. We will check your memory. I can give you a number of I can give you a number of numbers. Do you have a pen and paper?
I do, yes.
Okay. So I will give you a line of numbers, and your task will.
And a chimpanzee is going to do a better job than me. But go ahead.
No, come on. It's easy. It's very simple. Okay. Are you ready?
Yes. Should I be writing or just remembering?
Yeah. First I dictate you write. Okay. Ready?
Yes.
Okay. 1, 2, 4, 711, 162, 229, 374, 656. Okay, so this is the row of numbers. Your task is you look at these numbers, try to remember. You have only 1 minute, and then you try to reproduce the whole row of numbers. Okay?
Okay.
Let's do it. You have a minute.
I'm actually going to pause for 1 minute. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Turn around and try to.
Okay. 1, 2, 4, 7, 1, 1, 1, 6, 9, 1, 3, 4, 2, 6, 2. Not even close.
Okay, so why it's impossible? Nobody can do. What happened? You tried to remember using your memory, and your memory was just a biologically driven memory. You didn't use your cultural memory, because to remember something, sometimes you need only just memory. But there is a effect of the working memory. This 7 plus minus 2. So we can remember for a short period of time only 7 elements plus minus 2. So, and it's much longer. So it's absolutely out of limits of everyone's memory. It's impossible task for children, for adults, because the level of complexity of this task is much over our limits. So that's why even the academic, the member of the Academy of Science cannot do this task.
Yeah.
But now I can give you a cultural tool, and you will reproduce this line like this. Let's look at this row. Do you have this line in front of you?
Yes.
Okay. You see 1, 1, 2. What is the difference between 1 and 2? 1.
1. Okay.
Between 2 and 4?
2.
Between 4 and 7?
3.
Between 7 and 11?
4.
4. Between 11 and 16?
5. Yeah. And then 6. Cool.
And then 6. So if you know this, you can easily reproduce this line.
Yes.
So this is the cultural tool. If you have a cultural tool, you can easily remember this. But your memory now is different. Now you are not using your biological memory. You are using your cultural memory. But your biological memory now works as a part of your cultural memory, because you still have to remember. You still have to remember that I need to put 1 and 2 and 3, right? So this is how your biological memory now works to be subordinated to the cultural memory.
I want to show you something.
And the cultural memory allows you to remember and recall and memorize much longer line of numbers. And you can even remember much more. 11, 12, 13, 14, and so on.
I know the numbers are probably backwards, but I wrote it vertically, which made it so much harder to even see that the 1 1 was an 11. Huh?
Okay. So you see, this example shows that we can use our mechanical memory. We can call it mechanical memory, or elementary, or cultural memory. What's the difference is that for cultural memory, we need to have internal tools, just something which helps us to reproduce correctly the whole line. This understanding of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the cultural. So you see now the difference. And now let's come to Vygotsky's example. In one of his articles, I think it's 1928, the problem of cultural development of the child, I think. So he gives an example of 2 children. Say that one child, there are 2 children, and the task is to remember something, to remember a line of words. And one child can remember less and then reproduce less. Another child can remember more and reproduce more. So we can compare these 2 children and saying the amount of memory of child 1 is less than the amount of memory of child 2, which means that the memory of child 2 is more developed than the memory of child 1. If child 1 can remember only 5 things and the child 2 can remember 12, definitely, which means that child 2 has much more developed memory. But is this really correct to compare this? Because he says no, because child 2 might have using the cultural tools which help him to remember more, but he doesn't tell us how he remembers. He's just using the tools. And therefore, child 1 is using his biological memory, biologically driven elementary. Child 2 is using his cultural memory. How can we compare 2 types of memory which are different? We cannot compare things which are different by their nature. But in experimental settings, they look the same. This child remembers quickly, and this child remembers quickly. So these 2 looks like the same. Or even more, this child 2 might have less developed mechanical memory, compensated by more developed cultural memory. So, to avoid such kind of...
So then if you gave child 1 the same cultural tool,
yeah,
and they perform differently, then you would have something to go on.
Yes. So this is because we are comparing things which have different nature. So that's why Vygotsky says that we need to change our understanding of phenomena, because sometimes phenomena looking similar, they are different. Sometimes phenomena which are different, which look different, are similar. So, because they have the same origin. So that's why Vygotsky said that to study the process of development, we have to change the focus of our analysis. We have to create a method which helps us not only to compare the results, the levels, but to reconstruct the whole process. In our experiment, we take the child with no cultural memory, we give him the tasks to check his natural or her natural memory, and then we, in play situation or in the classroom or somehow, we introduce tools and see how the child is using these tools, and then we can build the whole process of development from natural memory to cultural memory just during our experimental. And this will be very interesting experiment, how in specially created conditions, how these conditions support the child's transition from non-mediated direct psychological functions to complex mediated indirect high psychological functions. And this is the key idea of Vygotsky's experiment. That's why it's experimental genetical method. That's why it's genetical experimental method. And this is the biggest difference comparing to traditional psychological experiments. When they are measuring something, they are doing intervention, and then they are measuring something, said, okay, there is a qualitative or significant differences, and in control group there is no significant differences. So and therefore the conclusion is that it happens because of intervention. That's
okay.
So yeah, so it's a very different.
So traditional method is more likely to make the error of mistaking two things as equal, the error of assuming you're comparing the same things when that might not be the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is
And
nothing.
how do you?
No.
How do you know? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Don't please misunderstand me. Maybe I was not good. So there is nothing bad in traditional methods. Traditional methods are traditional methods because they are based on their theoretical framework. Theoretical framework is to describe phenomena.
Yes.
And they're describing phenomena very well. They're describing the changes of phenomena very well. They are focused on that.
I see.
They put these research questions and they have these research answers. Perfect. Fantastic. Research answers correspond to the research questions. Research answers gives answers to the research questions. No problem with that. But Vygotsky said, yes, but as my interest is to study the process of development, I have to change my research questions to questions from how or when to what, how, to why, and because of what.
How might a researcher know that student A and student B are both not using a cultural tool? Like, how do you know that this kid isn't using one?
So it's not in interest for the traditional psychology. They're just comparing. They might be interested in that, of course.
No, but how would you know, for example? Like, how would somebody using a cultural historical method?
Yeah. Well, I will ask the child to tell me the story, how he remembers it.
Okay.
Is there any secret or something? Or give him the secret and he responds, oh, I already know. I already know. Don't tell me. Okay, that's great. So, and for another child, I say, yeah, you cannot know. I can give you a trick, magic trick. So I can make a kind of magic show or street magic for him. Doesn't matter. So the point is that the method allows not to make mistakes like that. Okay?
I see.
So, because if my task is to describe how something happens, that's good. But if my task is to describe why it happens, it might mislead me. Okay, so, and because of this interesting and very unusual approach to doing experiment, one of my tasks was to explain to my colleagues, to my students, to my PhD students, the early career researchers, what does it mean to do a Vygotskian experiment when we are collecting data, when we are making data analysis? The problem was that in his book, Volume 4, History of Development of Higher Mental Functions, I think it's chapter 2, the method. Well, Vygotsky gives only general characteristics of this method without explaining how it might look in a field work, how it might look in a concrete. So, and my task was to make a conversion of this general approach into the very practical principles which might help my colleagues to organize the experiment according to the requirements of the general experimental genetic method, to apply the method into the concrete research, concrete project. And I don't want to tell you the story how I did it, because I had to collect all the places from all the writings of Vygotsky when he explains a little bit more details, less details about his experimental settings in formation of concepts, memory, attention. So, and then I have developed this list of 5 principles, and we already discussed principle 1, which is the buds of development. And principle says that the most useful way of studying the process of development is to identify the functions which are in the beginning of their developmental cycle, because some functions are already developed. We are working with children at different ages.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, in primary school, children have already developed some psychological functions. For example, their will is quite okay developed. They can control themselves. They can discipline themselves. So their memory is quite well developed already. So, but their thinking might be not, especially abstract thinking or theoretical thinking or conceptual thinking. They're full of everyday concepts, but as for scientific concepts, probably not. So we are. It makes it very useful for us just to, if my interest is to study the certain higher psychological functions, I better try to find children at the age where the functions are at the beginning. So my task is to find the buds of development, because if at the end I want to get fruits, if at the end I want to creating experimental conditions to support these buds to become the fruits as a result of my experimental study, I have to find the buds first. If there are no buds yet, I cannot, or I can create absolutely ideal conditions, but nothing happens. If there are fruits already, so I don't need to create any conditions. So that's why I have to find the participants, where at the age where some psychological functions are at the embryonic state, they are ready to go. And one of the things which might help me is Vygotsky's book, The Problem of Age. In the book, The Problem of Age, Vygotsky gives the periodization of child development according to psychological ages. And he highlights which functions are the most developed at every age. Unfortunately, only 3 or 4 chapters of the book are translated into English in one of the volumes. I think it's volume 5. So, and me and my colleague David Kellogg and myself, we are now preparing that translation, English translation of the whole book. But the point is that at every stage, at every age, in the child, there are functions which are already developed, fruits, and at the same time, there are functions which are in the buds. It's not like in a tree, first buds, then all are flowers, all are fruits. The child is much more complex. As a child, as a tree, there are some fruits and the buds and the flowers at the same time. So, so that's why but the question is, where are the buds? And the answer is the buds are not within the child. Buds are not in the child. Buds exist in a form of social interaction because of the general genetic law, which says that every function appears twice. First, it appears in social plane, right, of the stage, in a form of interactions, and then it appears within the child as interpsychological category. So, and if my research question is to study the origins of these particular functions, I have to look at the child and find the buds of development of these particular functions in child's everyday interactions, or putting child into specially created laboratory conditions to create these conditions which generate the changes of the buds into the fruits. So, and one of the examples of research of my PhD students is the dissertation of Victoria Minson, who studied the development of storytelling in children. And she applied the principle of the buds, and she discovered that it was a story when the girl could not tell the story about her monkey. In Australia, in the kindergarten, they are using the practice of storytelling, like show and tell, called show and tell. So the child can bring the toy from the home and tell the story, to show the toy and tell the story. And it was a problem that the girl could not tell a story about her monkey at all. And the problem was that why this girl couldn't tell a story? It might be lots of reasons for that. For example, problems with her memory, problems with her speech, thinking, or what. And then Victoria applied the principle of the buds, and she discovered that the girl is fantastic. The girl is very active. The girl knows a lot of stories. She has an experience to live in Jakarta. She knows the football teams, planets, Union Jack, everything. She is very talkative. She tells the stories about her life in Jakarta, her friends, only when somebody is talking to her. So the problem was that she's very good in telling stories only when you are communicating, asking questions, reacting in communication. But when the task is just to tell the story of her own, she could not. You see, the buds were there. She already can do, in cooperation with others, something which she cannot yet do of her own. Zone of proximal development. So, and this is how it works.
So she had a hard time being her own partner.
Huh?
Yes. So she had a hard time being her own partner, like almost playing the role of the.
No. In her everyday communication with teachers and with other children, she is absolutely okay.
No, but what I'm saying is, when she didn't have a partner, she struggled.
Yeah, when the task is just to tell the whole story about the monkey, she cannot, because it's a little bit difficult for her. So, and then we created the way how to support this goal using some interesting things to be able to tell the stories. So to develop her storytelling, because the problem was not her memory was not developed. The problem was not in her speech development. The problem was not in her thinking. The problem was that storytelling which requires memory and thinking and so on is not developed and still remains in a bud stage. So, and then we identified that bud stage, and we started from that. So I don't want to tell you the whole story about this girl, but I'm just giving you an example of how important it is to identify the buds. This is the principle of the buds. Then the principle
was she able to tell stories sort of at the end of the experiment, at the end of the process?
Of course, yes.
Okay, so what developed? Was there a certain higher mental function that developed, or was there the ability to tell stories that developed, or what exactly developed?
What does it mean, ability to tell story?
Yeah, that's
storytelling requires different high psychological functions working together. Memory, will, imagination, thinking, at least.
So let's say we take those four, yes?
Yeah.
Would your conclusion be that all four developed, or some sort of special combination of the four developed? Like, how would you?
Yeah, well, that's very difficult. It was not the focus of the research. So the whole focus of the research was not about to help this girl to develop. So the task was different, but I'm giving you just an example how we identified the buds and where are the buds.
I see.
So don't think that the whole research was about that girl. No. It's just an example. And as a result, she told the story not about monkey, but much more complex story, easily and individually. And even we asked teacher to provocate, to asking her questions which might mislead her from the story. But she was so strong that she didn't listen to the teacher, and she continued to tell the story the way she wanted to tell. So you see, well, but
is there a certain tool that was introduced that really allowed? I'd like to hear about that if you don't mind.
Maybe next time.
Okay.
Or the best way is just to invite Victoria Minson. She will be happy to give an interview for you.
Yeah. Okay.
Ask her about her research, and you will be very, very, very impressed, because this is a high level, the highest level. So she got her PhD degree, and examiners of her thesis highlighted her impact like outstanding, 5 stars.
Yeah.
It's for Monash, it's very, very rare. It's maybe 1%, top 1% top of all the completions of PhDs in Monash, and she got it. So she will be happy to tell you more about her research, because her research was not about developing children. Her research was to create a kind of matrix teachers can use to support children's development.
Perfect. Yeah.
She has developed a practical tool matrix, which is called PAM, Planning and Assessment Matrix. Okay, so I can give you Victoria's email if you like.
Yes, and before you go on, there's one thing I wanted to remember to ask you. You remember you wrote one paper where you said you basically copy and pasted some of Vygotsky's studies, and you said to you gave the challenge to your reader, see if you could locate the 5 principles in here, even though they're not. Can you please share that paper with me? And do you remember the name of it?
I think it was a chapter in the book, which is called Visual Methodologies in Studying. So if you just send me an email,
I will.
An email, and I will send it to you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so that was the kind of buzz. And the second principle, which we have already discussed, is the principle of drama, or the category, or the collision. So why this is important? There are 2 reasons. First reason is that because it follows from Vygotsky. Vygotsky was the first who said that development is drama. Development is overcoming the dramatic moments, dramatic collisions. So there is no development without dramatic collisions, dramatic situations. And this is absolutely correct, but I want to commend the word drama, because for American and British tradition, drama is something which has a negative connotations, like dramatic, people trying to escape dramas from their lives. They say that drama is something bad. But let's look at this philosophically. From the dialectical point of view, drama is an important component of our life. And from dramatic events, our development generates, because drama is a contradiction. And dialectically, contradiction is a source of development. There is no contradiction, there is no development. Development is the resolution of the contradictions. We resolve the contradictions, and as a result, we are dealing with the new ones. So
and this is one way to distinguish development from learning. Right? Yeah. Because learning can simply be some sort of growth or some sort of acquisition.
Yeah.
So development, as it's used in this context, is connected both to drama and both to resolution.
Yep, absolutely. And the form of existence of contradictions in our life is the social dramas we are. So, of course, dramas might have negative effect, might have positive effect, but the point is that we have to understand clearly that dialectically speaking, if there is no contradiction, there is no development. And if there is no contradiction, no development, the contradiction, the drama is a main characteristic of human development. We are developing from drama to drama.
Is resolution necessary, or just contradiction?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. There are sometimes dramas cannot be resolved. So, yeah, and might have a negative effect, and so. So the principle of drama is that why it's a principle? Because it helps me, a researcher, when I have a collection of observations about the child. Let's imagine I have 24 or 35 hours of video observations of the child in the everyday settings, be it to home settings or school settings or daycare center settings. What can I do with these 35 or 50 hours of video? It's possible to analyze every moment. So we sit together with my student and we look at this video and we try to find the moments when the child experiencing the small dramas, small dramatic situations. for example, when there is time to go to bed, but the child doesn't want to go to bed, wants to stay playing, and mom says, go, go, go. The child says, no, no, no. So this is a dramatic, this is a small, very small drama. For us, it's maybe nothing, but for child, it's a real drama. So, or they are playing together, and then they're deciding who takes the role of the wolf, who takes the role of that, and they are debating about it, who is the first, who is the second. All these interesting, small, dramatic events are, for us, are most important pieces of data to analyze, because we can see how the child tries to resolve the dramatic events. What are new tools he is using, or what tools he already or she already has to resolve the problem. What suggests, okay, you want to play this, I want to play. Okay, let's make it in order. I play first, you then say, okay, good. So you see, these moments are important. Or we can specially create the dramatic moments in special conditions in the psychological laboratory. For example, we play together with the children, and in their role, they have to solve the certain task. It might be a dramatic event associated with this task. Like we have to risk the Captain Hook, but there are pirates, we have to hide. So being involved in these dramatic moments, it gives me a lot of information about the process of development, because in these moments, I can see the process of development just in front of my eyes, how the child overcomes. So, for example, I could see this with your example. You see, I gave you the task of the row of numbers you could not remember, nobody could. Then I gave you the tool, and I observed how you see what happened. You could not solve the problem. It was a drama. It was a drama for you, small drama, of course, but it was a drama. But then I gave you a tool, and you said, "Ah, yes, okay." So you see, so that's what I did. Was
you introduced the problem and you introduced the solution.
Yep. So this is that's why if my task as a researcher if my research question is to study what kind of cultural tools the child using to overcome the dramas, on what are the dramas the child experiences as the source, as the interpsychological. So in my data, I specially take these moments, which gives me information to answer my research question. If my research question is related to the origins of higher psychological functions, I know that origins are in dramatical moments. And therefore, to answer the question, I find the dramatical moments in my 24 or 58 hours of observation. I take them for deeper analysis in order to find the answer to my research question about the sources of development of higher psychological functions as an interpsychological level. So that's, again, the principle of organization of experiment and principle of data collection and the principle of data analysis. So it's all coherent. You see the coherence from theoretical framework, laws of development, concepts, and a method, and the data collection and data analysis. This is absolutely in line with everything. So, and it was just a reminder about two principles we have discussed already, right? So, yeah, it was just a reminder about these principles we have discussed already, right? Am I right?
Yes, yeah.
We have 3 more to discuss, right?
Yes. 3 more.
I'm still on the right track?
I think you're doing okay.
Okay.
I think so. I think the only question some people might have is are the buds and the drama ever the same thing?
No, the buds are not. The buds are high psychological functions which exist in interaction, but the drama is the dramatic moments of the child. So when there is some challenge the child cannot overcome. Of course, they are related, and all principles are related, but they are different principles. because here my task is to find the buds. Here my task is to see the initial moment, this interpsychological level, or psychological plane. Of course, they are not absolutely different. They are related to each other, but they're looking at different angles.
But are the buds ever located in the drama?
No, they can be located in the interaction. For example, at Yola, I was telling, she didn't experience any drama communicating with others. But the drama for her was that she could not tell the story about the monkey.
Got it.
Okay.
So the principle of interaction between real and ideal forms is third, if you want to do that one next.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Well,
I'm going to pause 1 second. I'm sorry.
Can we interrupt?
Okay.
So the principle of interaction of ideal and present forms. Well, it's not again Nikolai's principle. This is Vygotsky's idea. Why it's so important? It's so important because cultural historical theory and Vygotsky wrote that one of the most interesting, one of the essential features, most important distinguishing feature of human development, comparing to any other kind of development, comparing to biological development, historical development, very specific feature in relation to psychological development is that psychological development goes as a process of interaction of the ideal and present forms. This is the feature which does not exist in historical development, which does not exist in biological development, in evolution, only in a psychological development. That's why it's so important, because it differentiates the psychological development from any other types of development, being to historical or biological or economical or theological, doesn't matter. So first, and the second point is that it shows the dialectics of the present and the future. Do you remember our story? I told you that according to dialectics, being, the process, being is not the state, being is a process, and being is the process of becoming something else. This is what dialectics is. Do you remember? I told you before the break. So when I'm saying child's being, I mean the child is becoming different, slowly, child becoming. And there is a dialectics of present and the future, because becoming is for the future, from present to the future. I'm becoming something different, right? So you see that first, it highlights the specific feature of mental development or psychological development. Secondly, it applies the dialectical method as a methodology of studying the dialectics of becoming, the child in the process of becoming. So what's the idea? Why Vygotsky introduced the ideal forms and present forms? What are these forms? Why ideal? So very, very shortly, I will begin with the famous example. Vygotsky gives an example, very simple example everybody can understand. You don't need to be a psychologist to understand this, because every father, every mother, every grandfather, grandmother, every teacher knows this. The Vygotsky's example is this. Imagine a baby, infant. The baby infant, every father remembers first time. So, and Vygotsky says that, look, how the mother communicates with the baby, with the infant. She talks to him or her. She speaks to her and to him. Yeah, looking at reactions. If you come to this mom and say to her, "Why you are speaking to this?" The baby doesn't understand. You will be then the enemy of this mom forever. She will never forgive you, right? Because every mom said, "No, of course, my John or my Anthony, my Nikolai completely understands what I'm saying." Yeah. Well, of course, it's a partly joke, but it's not a joke. You know, Vygotsky was a genius, taking the moments everybody knows, moments that he was able to see very, very deep processes behind these very simple things, like bringing the coin for the Lord, or just deciding what to do. So the genius is genius. Okay. So what Vygotsky says, he says, look, let's look at this example genetically. Mom is speaking to the child all the time, using her psychological functions, which is called speech. She is actually speaking to the child and trying to find how the child reacts. So for mom, it's a communication. And what this is for the child? The child is in a situation when somebody speaks to him or to her. Speech, mom's speech is around the child. Of course, the child doesn't understand the meaning. But the child is in a situation when developed function, speech, is in present time, mom's speech. And then Vygotsky says, let's look further. Let's look what happens in 3 years. In 3 years, at the age of 1 and then at the age of 3, definitely, the child will be able to speak this language, speech development. So, and this is what mom expected. That's all we all expect from the children. But he says, it's a very interesting, but this developed form of speech exists in the child's life from the very beginning. It means that the future form, what the child should get in the future, by a known mystical way, presents from the very beginning. And the child begins to interact with this. First by reacting, opening eyes, smiling, listening mom's voice, reacting, then imitating, then bubbling, then, and then the child develops his speech in the process of interacting with mom's developed speech all the time. Imagine what happens if there is no developed speech around the child. If nobody speaks to the child, can we expect that in 1 year, in 3 years, the child's speech will be developed? No. Absolutely no. So this is why so important for development that the function which the child should only reach at the end of developmental cycle should somehow to be in presence today and actively interact with the child, imitations, repetitions. So that's why Vygotsky called this mom's developed speech ideal form. Ideal form doesn't mean ideal, doesn't mean like the best, not like that. And my favorite joke is about it when I tell this to the students, especially in Brazil, saying that there are no things which are the best in the world. If somebody is dreaming about to find the best husband, no way. There are no best ideal husbands, you know. Of course, there are ideal wives, and you see how students react to it. Okay, so the problem is that it's not the best. Ideal is just more developed. more developed. Okay. But when the child reaches this level in 3 years, the child will interact with much more developed new forms of ideal speech when he goes to school and so on. And every time when the child reaches a certain level of development, his communication with another level of ideal forms. And the process goes and goes and goes and never stops. That's why ideal forms are so important, because they might show me the direction of child development. Child development goes on the direction to that ideal form with which the child interacts. For me, as a researcher, it's so important to understand what is the direction of child development. Development of child's speech, development of child's thinking, development of child's emotions, development of child's memory or attention or imagination. So, and to understand this, I might use two ways. First way is that I go to the child's everyday settings, family settings, for example, or classroom, or early childhood settings. And my task is, if my research question is to study the directions of children's development, my task is very simple. I have to find what are the ideal forms surrounding the child, and how, in the process of child's everyday life, during the lessons or classes or play or so, how the child interacts with these ideal forms. So when I have 100 hours of observation, and if my research question is to study the directions of the process, I'm only taking from these observations the moments when the child interacts with the ideal forms, which might be teacher's instructions or whatever. So you see how it helps me as a researcher to focus on the specific aspect of in my data, because these are the most important things. Because this interaction of ideal and present form is, Vygotsky says, the distinguishing feature of the human development. He says that if there is no ideal forms, no development. Or if there are ideal forms, but if there is no interaction, if the child does not interact with ideal forms, no development.
What if the ideal form, let's just say like the mother's speech, what if the ideal form is present and interacting, but very painful?
If it's very painful, I don't think it's a good ideal form. Ideal form is just a developed form, natural.
Yeah, but just, you know, if the mother's talking and interacting with the child, and she has fully developed speech, but she's just nasty. How might that influence?
But there might be a negative effect, of course.
Yeah.
The child's speech will be like this because he learns from the mom. So we have to be very careful. And of course, the ideal forms are not the best ones, as I said. Okay.
Right.
So they might be negative, they might be positive, they might be different.
But is the role of pleasure or pain something worth looking at, or not really?
No, I don't know, Anthony. It might be an interesting question to discuss, but we are discussing the general principles. And I'm trying to explain why this principle is so important and how it helps me to create my experimental settings. Before going to the children, I have to think about, okay, what kind of ideal forms I will bring and what I'm going to do to create a situation when the child will interact with this. So I have two tasks. I have to provide to the child the most efficient ideal forms, and I have to think what are the most efficient ways of interacting of the child with this. So you see, as a researcher, I have very different tasks. I'm involved in the process. I'm part of the process. I'm just actively creating the conditions by providing these ideal forms. If this ideal form doesn't work, I change the ideal form. I try different ideal forms. in order to find which is the best ideal form for the child at this age, from this ethnic group, from this cultural background, from that learning difficulties, and so on and so on and so on. So depending on the child. And as my second task is that if there are good ideal forms, what might be wrong is that there is no interaction. What can I do during my experiment to create, to build the system of interactions? How I want to keep the child involved in interacting with their ideal forms. So I'm making my research design having this in mind, because if my research question is about that, if my research question is about what are the direction of the child development in this particular age, or in this particular settings, or in this particular group, and with this particular learning difficulty, so and what might be the best ideal forms and ways of interaction to overcome these learning difficulties to support development. You see, I can put a lot of interesting research questions here based on this principle of the ideal and present forms. So, and one of my students, she did a fantastic study. She was looking at English classes in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, they have at primary schools, they have English classes. So, and the demand from the government, from the king of Saudi Arabia, is that they need a generation of people who can communicate with people in English to promote Muslim Islamic values, because Saudi Arabia is one of the countries, is the heart of the Islam, and holy places like Mecca and Medina are in. So, and the problem is that the classes in Saudi schools are organized in a very traditional ways. So children have to learn English words, English phrases, so through singing songs together, playing games together, lots of different activities. But what was not presented quite widely is that the settings and the pedagogies teachers use were focused mostly on language acquisition, but not on the development of their speech. You see, language acquisition, foreign language acquisition, and ability to speak and communicate in language is not the same. Of course, you cannot develop your speech without having any knowledge of the language, but there are different, psychologically, there are different things. Language is one thing, speech is another. Speech is when we use the language to communicate, which means speech is the process, high psychological function, but language is a tool. I can communicate with you, I can speak to you, sending you the same message using different languages. I might say to you, Anthony, you are doing a fantastic job collecting these videos. I might say the same. Anthony, делаешь прекрасную работу, собирая эти видеоколлекции. You see, I sent the same message to you using English and using Russian. I only changed the tool. I didn't change the message. Okay, so this is a kind of, and the point is that Saudi children, they know a lot of English words, but they cannot communicate, they cannot speak, because speech is a result of communication. The origins of speech, as Vygotsky says, is a communication. And for this, communication with the ideal forms is the most important. And the task for my student was to see what are the ideal forms teachers in Saudi Arabia use as ideal forms to support the development of English speech in their children. And she found that no, nothing. That's why they know a lot. But because of lack of communication situations, no communication, spontaneous, free communication in English, no English speech, no English speech. So it's very briefly. That's why So the idea of ideal forms and interactions with the present forms was the core idea for my student to make a whole research project. She collected a lot of data, but making observations of the classroom activities, and she did a fantastic analysis about what kind of ideal forms and how they work. And she made suggestions about what might be changed in the practices of a classroom, what teachers can do to change their pedagogies a little bit, not to forget about language acquisition, because this is important, but plus to this, to spend some time by creating the situations where the child is forced to communicate, maybe with mistakes, doesn't matter, but communicate in English with other children or with the teacher in imaginary situations. For example, if the topic is shopping, so first teacher gives some vocabulary to children. Shop, buy, sell, price, money, how much, all these things. And then immediately she says, okay, now we're playing shopping. You are customers, I'm a seller. And they try to communicate. So she creates the communicative situation when the children are communicating, trying to, we are here to buy shoes, what is the size, left, right. So builds a kind of communicative situations, and then the children can reproduce this situation to themselves. So therefore they will be able to speak English. So, and this is a kind of things. And I also should mention the fantastic work of Bert van Oers, from Professor Bert van Oers from the Netherlands. As you know, Holland is not an official country, official name of the country anymore. The official name is the Netherlands. So, and he did a fantastic research about how to support child's development of their thinking through play. And one of the famous things he did was just to play the shoes shop, when children have to find the proper size, the proper left or right, or something, learning this size measuring things. So, and you can find his works available. So, and this is all about ideal and present forms. So, and Vygotsky's example about, this is not the mom who was the ideal form for the child. It was not the mom's language which was the ideal form. By the way, in translation, it was translated in 1994 as mom's language provides the ideal form. But Vygotsky says mom's speech is ideal form. Because of that mistake, there is a lot of different interpretations of ideal forms. Somebody says that adults are ideal forms, which is not. Somebody says that language is ideal form. No. Very, very, very important is that the developed form, the higher psychological function which should appear in the child in the future. Specific certain higher psychological function. An example is speech, but speech is only an example. The same is about volition, memory, attention, imagination, all these processes. So that's a kind of story about the principle of ideal and present forms. And now I hope you understand why it's so important and how helpful, how really helpful it is for me as a researcher to make my research design in a way, in a very specific, very concrete way. And by doing this, I'm also applying the dialectics of present and the future. And in doing this, I'm also applying a general idea of the most important distinguishing feature of human development is the interaction of ideal and real. And by doing this, I'm applying the idea of the social environment as a source of development. So you see how important this principle is, because it concretizes very, very big and deep ideas, and altogether it helps me to understand the process of development. to organize the process of development by bringing ideal forms, or organizing the interaction, or by just observing what are the ideal forms surrounding the child and how the child interacts. Yeah. So, and
I think I'm following you quite well.
Thank you.
The next principle is developmental tools, which I would think would concretize this even more.
Yeah. Yeah. And
you know, one thing that was really helpful at the end of what you were saying was let's distinguish language from speech.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's not necessarily the tools, but the I guess the ability to use the tools is the thing that develops, I guess. So the ideal form is not the person having a lot of tools; it's the person using the tools.
Yeah.
In the present, right? In your presence, and you interacting with the person using tool.
Yes, and therefore it gives you a direction, because the direction goes to those ideal forms which surround the child. This is a direction. This is it's like navigation. You use a navigator, Waze or Google Maps in your car. It gives you a direction. So it moves you to the point. You go from point B. So this is like that. Yeah.
Are there any experiments?
Dear Anthony, can I suggest something? Look,
Sure.
we spent already 2 hours, and I'm very, very sorry, but I have something to do today. I didn't expect that we spent such a long time for just coming to one principle. I really feel a little bit sad about that, but can we continue somehow next time, please?
I don't see why not. I don't see why not.
Thank you.
You know, let me just say that we're using the same words over and over again, and we're using the same terms and revisiting the same terrain. Yeah. But each time we step on it, for me, it's a little more refined, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm moving from like 20% understanding of a word to like 40% understanding of a word. You
know? Yeah, I'm still on my 50%.
Yeah.
When I Vygotsky, so don't think I understand 100%.
Yeah, no, I know.
If you want somebody who understands 100%, ask them. They are sure. I'm not.
Yeah, but the point I'm just saying is like we are talking about the same things, but that's part of like a spiraling process where each time you revisit it, it's an opportunity to understand it a little better. So, so maybe in the next 2-hour conversation we'll get through or perhaps.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah. So we just directly come to principle of developmental tools and say that if you want to understand this, please watch the previous video about first 2 principles. Otherwise, I don't want to repeat.
Exactly. I'm going to put all these together eventually in one place. You know, just the 5 principles. I'm going to cut one video from that. Yeah. Hey, good to see you.